Welcome, everyone. To kick us off, I want to give you some examples because I live and study in the world of tensions, but I'm going to suggest that you do too. And you certainly lead through them. Let me give you a few. So, in the year 2000, Lego was just rated the toy of the century. We've all played with them, stepped on them, right? We know them well. And suddenly felt themselves really at a turning point. Organizations like Nintendo and Barbie are knocking at their door. They have nothing to do with bricks. And are wondering in this moment, do we double down? Do we stick with what's gotten us literally 100 years of year after year growth, right? That beautiful brick. Or do we pivot and do we think for tomorrow and do we move into radical innovation today or tomorrow? About a decade later, Paul Pullman, who is an alum of Cincinnati and someone I knew well, stepped from Nestle to Unilever when Unilever was in a financial tailspin. But Paul had always dreamed about doing something bigger for the world. And he challenged himself and he was saying, I really want to do something about social responsibility. And the firm was like, finances. And so he challenged himself and he grappled with this tension between money and mission, financial and social responsibilities. Tensions are ubiquitous. I want you to think about all of the different elements on both ends of your ropes, right? You feel these tug of wars because the challenge isn't whether you face tensions, it's how. And what I'd like to suggest in my 25 plus years of research in this area is there are different alternatives here. And my hope today is to help push you to consider how you might expand your toolbox. Here's our default, either or thinking. It's really based on formal logic. We weigh the pros and cons after we've nicely framed a dilemma, and we move on. It's a trade-off mindset. And I want to be really clear. There are times when we need this default. It's fast, it's efficient, gives you a sense of control. There are a whole host of reasons why this is our default. I'd also like to suggest that this is limiting. Are you really bounded by a binary? Is it really X or Y? But further, I want to suggest that it's also a trap. Because my work has found that there are a number of vicious cycles, I'm going to suggest 3 in particular, that can be triggered by this either-or approach. Don't you like my little rabbit? This is intensification. We go down rabbit holes all the time. One of the reasons is that in this trade-off mentality, we tend to keep leaning toward a favored side. Right? It could be centralization, decentralization, innovation, efficiency, right? Today, tomorrow, work, life. You pick it. My point is, one of the reasons we start leaning towards a favored side is we've all got our strengths. Our organizations have our strengths. There are reasons why we tend to keep leaning. Right? In the case of Lego, you can imagine, after 100 years, leaning in their particular direction was really focused on quality control. I mean, they were just meticulous, coming out of small bill in Denmark about quality. They had very tight, clear values, and they just kept leaning. And in doing so, they got better and better and better at just that, which is beautiful. The problem is, they went so far down that rabbit hole, they did such a deep rut, that changing was incredibly hard. And one of the reasons I'm going to use these 2 examples, I know they're a bit old and they're a bit bigger, but we know them. I'm telling you, these patterns are so consistent in the work I've done, but I also know they're happy endings. And I hope that can suggest that there's a way out of there. But in the 70s, they added the color green. It was their 5th color. It took 7 years. That's what happens when you're so far down one side. It takes one person to say no and 7 execs to say yes to get anything done. That was a problem. The second vicious cycle is when typically comes after the first, and you swing the pendulum. You go, oh my gosh, what has happened? we're complacent, we've missed the boat, right? I'm telling you about Lego at this point. And you swing the pendulum and you say, we gotta go into innovation. We gotta make it really about creativity and change. But we swing the pendulum too hard. We do this all the time. And by swinging it too hard, we actually, this pendulum becomes a wrecking ball, and we destroy really important things that we developed in the past. I mean, in the case of Lego, they went so hardcore into change and radical innovation. I mean, in fact, a couple of years later, it was called textbook perfect. By the way, in 5 years, they were on the brink of bankruptcy and takeover. The reason was, it now took one person to say yes and 8 people to say no to change anything. They did things like, as an example, kick George Lucas out of headquarters 3 times. Who's George Lucas? Star Wars, right? Thank goodness the CEO finally said, wait a minute. Maybe this should be our first partner. But Lego at the time was saying things like, we're Lego, we don't need partners, right? But Lego Star Wars kept them going. My point is, then they get into this radical innovation. By the time this new product development binge had happened, they had 187 colors. They had gone into this crazy binge and changed their global supply chain. Can you imagine? You guys know a box of Legos. One piece is wrong, it doesn't go. The ultimate example of that one, and I'm trying to give you the sense that we've all done it, is who would become the new CEO. He came in from McKinsey, asked a question. He said, how much money are we making on every box of Legos? What's the worst answer you could get? I don't know. That was the answer. Yeah, I don't know. He goes, what do you mean we don't know? But because of that binge, they were actually losing money on everything because it was too complicated. They had too many specialized bricks. You can circle the world 7 times with this standard brick. It costs almost nothing. You get into all these specialties and it's expensive. Again, my point is, we've all swung the pendulum too hard. Work life, oh my gosh, we burn out after our Scooby snacks of achievement kind of run out. The next thing you know, we're going, maybe I just need to become a yoga instructor, right? I don't know. We've all done this. The third vicious cycle is polarization, which from our work really is about different groups or just different individuals digging deeper ruts in opposing directions. And rather than communicating and working across and learning about how to actually make the most of the opposing sides, it's turf warfare, right? We're just fighting each other. In the case of Lego, as they're trying to pull out of their real tailspin, which it was even worse the second time when they got into radical innovation, the newcomers all focused on innovation, and the old guard could not see eye to eye. They just fought constantly. It's a trap. We can overdo our default. Now, the good news is there's an opportunity here, because the problem isn't the problem. The problem is the way we think about the problem. A great statement by some Stanford researchers. The way I got down into this path of paradox was, I mean, in many ways, but it was really, give you a sense, it was initially a study I read many years ago. It was conducted in the 70s by a guy named Rothenberg, who was studying creative geniuses. He was reading everything they wrote, letters, journals, papers, and he found a very interesting pattern. They love tensions. They see them as creative friction, as opportunities to learn and grow. Let me show you who I'm talking about. Picasso, juxtaposing light and dark, changing the nature of art and painting because he found depth in that juxtaposition. Mozart, harmony and discord, changed music, found himself and became an incredible teacher, not just composer, because of that juxtaposition. Virginia Woolf, Life and Death, very paradoxical, saw them as two sides of the same coin, challenging and pushing and opening opportunities for us. And then so much work on the paradoxes of quantum physics, from Einstein to Niels Bohr. Is it a particle or a wave? Is it a motion or at rest? They thought they were going crazy, but the problem couldn't be solved in Newtonian physics. It had to change. You do not need to be a creative genius to use their tactics. But I do think you need to think about paradox rather than trade-off. And I love the symbol of yin-yang. Paradox is really thousands of years old as a concept. It came certainly from really two different sides of the world at about the same time. Talk about paradoxical, right? The ancient Greeks coined the term. It means beyond belief, paradoxa, and was coming out of all sorts of challenges to formal logic. But the symbol of yin-yang comes from Taoism, the idea that there are two very opposing sides, that actually there's this dynamic that they feed each other. Love, hate, masculine, feminine, today, tomorrow. These ebb and flow together. Not a dilemma, a paradox. And that opens up the possibilities of both and thinking. So how? How do we move in that direction? I'm going to suggest there are three particular things I really want to leave you with today. So I'm simplifying. The first is you've got to change the questions you ask. And now that might seem simple. That might seem like simply changing a word, like do we do X or Y, to how do we do X and Y? Kind of. But one of the key reasons that we use or in the first place is our underlying assumptions put us there. We assume you can't do both. So changing the question is much harder than it sounds, and it is absolutely critical. Every meeting you're in, problem-solving session, personally or collectively, the way you frame the question bounds your solutions. So I need you to think and start getting critical about how you or other people in the room are teeing it up. Let me give you the example. I'll use Paul Pullman in Unilever. All right, so he gets to Unilever, and he has this social responsibility dream in the middle of a tailspin. And he asks a very different question. He said, well, what if our goal for the next 10 years was to double our profit and cut in half our environmental footprint? So he asked, how might we do that? I just want you to think at that time what people would say. The typical response was, you're crazy. It doesn't work like that. The bigger we get, the more harm we do. And he said, no, it can't work that way. We touch 2 billion consumers a day at Unilever at that time. We've got to change that. And what's fascinating about that change is it started to, that's a push. He started to say, bring in the tensions. Let's make every meeting a little more contentious. That might sound like a disaster for culture. But Amy Edmondson, who works on psychological safety, actually wrote the foreword to our book. I love Amy. I value her work because it takes enormous trust and care for each other to hold a space to have those sort of debates. And they matter. And it starts with you as leaders and the questions that you ask. Let's go to the next one. The second step is to separate and connect. Now, in either or thinking, in our default, we kind of, we separate, we analyze, we weigh the pros and cons, and we move on. I'm going to suggest here, we do need to separate, but we need to separate them in a way that helps us really deeply understand what is the value of the opposing sides. At our best, what does it look like to lean into radical innovation, to lean into cost control, to lean into social responsibility, right, you pick it. But to do that, to really do that at its best, you are going to have to make sure that you have champions for both sides in those rooms. You have to reach out and have lots of conversations to build depth around the opposing. At its best, what does each side look like? What value does it bring? And then you've got to connect. One of the ultimate ways to connect is to actually see how they're interwoven. So the other question in this step is, what hell breaks loose if you only did the one side? What could it look like at its worst? The reason why you need to do that part of the exercise is you can find out remarkably how the downside of one is the upside of the other and vice versa. The pattern actually looks like an infinity loop. It's a remarkable pattern. that we've seen again and again and again. But you need to put it on the table because you're going to have to unfreeze, especially if you've been leaning pretty hard to one side. Not only do you have to see the benefits of the other, you have to see the traps of the one you're in. And by putting it out there, you start to ask yourselves different questions along the way. It helps the first step. In the case of Unilever, Pullman said, look, no matter what we're doing, no matter what project we're doing, I want us to think about the separate and connect. So tell me how it will increase profit and how this project or step will increase our social responsibility, reduce our environmental footprint. So I'll give you an example in this one. And I loved this when he was explaining it to me. They were taking one of their shampoo products into, I believe it was Western Africa. And they said, so he was always doing this kind of approach and asking, make sure you got both columns going on at the same time. And so the team comes back and he says, let's hear it. How are we going to, now let's do the environmental impact first. How are we going to reduce water, reduce waste, reduce electricity, reduce transportation? Let's reduce packaging, right? Let's do all these things. Now, I want you to think about all those things we've just reduced, because then he's going to say, now tell me how we're going to increase profit. If we've reduced all of the things that I just said, what else did we reduce? Costs, okay? In many ways, this exercise that Paul really trained his people to do reminded me as we would, and I visited many places around the world. It was remarkable how embedded this approach became. We're constantly asking both questions. How do we increase profitability? How do we reduce environmental impact? People everywhere, without Paul standing there, knew those were the questions, and they had to be asked simultaneously. The example, though, reminded me oftentimes of the 80s and the automotive industry in the US. And this view that we in the US completely missed from Japan, which is an assumption that quality and costs are opposites. Versus, if you get the quality right, you reduce, right, waste and redos, and you can see what's working and not, I mean, think about JIT and everything in the Toyota production system. That is what started to happen at Unilever. They started to see that the two sides of the same coin were actually quite paradoxical and could work. Let's go to the third. The third piece is reconsider what the outcomes of this process look like. This is a little bit trickier in some ways because the either or, one of the reasons that we love either or thinking is it is clean and crisp and we know what a solution looks like. It's done, we think we've washed our hands of it and moved on. In the case of the tensions I'm talking about, and I'm going to suggest to you most of those that you're working with, if you can really get down to their cores, they are paradoxes, which not only means they're opposing, they're also interwoven, that's the yin yang, and they're persistent. You might have to make a decision right this minute about do we focus on innovation or cost control? Do we focus on social responsibility, whatever. But you'll have to make it again. That tension's not going away. These are bigger issues. Work life, not going away, right? Love, hate, all sorts of things. Trust, distrust, all of these kinds of tensions last because they not only pull in different directions, but they're connected. So the reason I'm saying that is it changes the way you think about what the outcomes might look like in two ways. The first, I'm going to use the example of a mule. We call this creative integration. It's kind of the win-win, smarter than a donkey, stronger than a horse, right? It's how do you have that beautiful moment where you find something that's going to work for both sides simultaneously and take it to the next level? An example, actually, right from that West Africa shampoo was Unilever invented the sachet. Can you picture a sachet? A little kind of packet of shampoo, first time? It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Less packaging, less water, right? Very concentrated, easy to ship. It's not like they're selling it in big box stores, right? They needed it. Worked for the market beautifully. It worked for the retailers. It worked for the consumers. They loved it. It sold like hotcakes, and it had lower costs. I mean, it was a win-win. Now, as I say that, Mules, and I know I'm stretching the analogy, are sterile. And I think it's important because they don't happen all the time. They don't have baby mules either, right? Which means you should celebrate. You should love it when you get some creative integration and feel that positivity and realize it may not happen again. And it's okay. Live in the moment. Far more often, what I find with leaders is the second, the tightrope walker, which basically means you know where you're going. You know what the end goal is, and you're taking micro steps left and right. When times are good, you might find we've got a little more cash. We've got a little bit more opportunity to put into the social responsibility, to put into R&D and basic innovation, to put, right? Whatever the case might be. Now maybe times are tight. We've got challenges. People are watching more closely. They're really watching the bottom line, right? Now we're going to put more into the financial side. We're going to put more into the controls, whatever the case might be. Your challenge as leaders is a couple pieces. One, don't go too far. You go down that rabbit hole, you fall off that wire. So you need some guardrails. Typically, I'm going to suggest the very best guardrails are two types. One is values. What matters most? How do you make sure you're not going to go too far onto a side and take you all the way off? But the other is simple rules. And I love Reed Hastings' book from Netflix about simple rules. This has worked in both of these companies and many others. Just how do we make sure we keep moving? In the case of Lego, as an example, they realized, you know what? We have to do a little research. How many specialized bricks do you really need in a box? And how many can we afford? That's not rocket science research. I want you to think about the question I just asked. It's really fairly simple. Your accountants can tell you how many you can afford, right? Because they know the differences in costs. You get a little focus group, you figure out with some, probably help from psychologists and others. With the other question, because what you're looking at is, how many do you need for the wow? How many specialty bricks do you need to make people go, ooh, I want that one? And guess what? It's not that many. So they had a very simple rule. It was something to the effect of 10% of a box can be specialized. And do you know what a rule like that does? One, made sure that every box had a very healthy margin. But two, this is why improvisation is paradoxical, by the way. Second City and others know this very well, is those simple rules are actually energizing. You say, ooh, I only have 10%. What am I going to do with it? Maybe there's another team that we could share one. And so at Lego, creativity went through the roof with constraints. How's that for a beautiful paradox? This is how we put these pieces together. And how you develop a paradox mindset. Both of these firms and many others that I've studied build into the culture through their leadership an awareness that you do not need to live in a binary that takes you down a vicious cycle. There's opportunities. We have now studied this capacity, and we're going to do some work on this afternoon as well, but a capacity to see friction as opportunity. That's a paradox mindset. We've studied it now in thousands of individuals in multiple languages and cultures, and what we've found is remarkable. According to their supervisors, those who have a paradox mindset perform better and are more creative. According to the individuals themselves, they are more satisfied. That is a very powerful triumvirate there. Higher performers, more creative, more satisfied, by leaning into something that we will naturally avoid. I'm not telling you it's going to be fun. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take practice, but it's a muscle that matters, and you can do so much with. I fervently believe in the power of paradox. It is a 1,000-plus-year-old concept, but it is a big change from a dilemma and a trade-off to think about how pieces fit together and how we might stop swinging pendulums so hard and building polarization to open possibilities, to learn and to change and grow. And I wish you all the best as you lead and thrive through paradoxes. Thank you.